So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final edition of this series of our Winter Warmer online talks, which are aimed at bringing you something a bit different during these winter months and to highlight and showcase different features of our wonderful Royal Parks. I'm Loveday, the Public Programs Learning Officer at the Royal Parks, and we are the charity that looks after the 8 Royal Parks in London. For those who aren't familiar, these are Hyde Park, Kensington Gardens, the Green Park, St James's Park, Regent's Park and Primrose Hill, Greenwich Park, Richmond Park and the focus of this evening's talk, Bushy Park. We also manage Brompton Cemetery and Victoria Tower Gardens. And through our work, we aim to welcome Londoners and visitors to London alike so that everyone can enjoy the spectacular nature and fascinating heritage that the parks have to offer, their well-being benefits, and also to protect and improve the precious biodiversity of the parks. Now, we're putting on this series of talks for free because we want to share our enthusiasm and love for these special places with as many people as possible. And we're delighted to welcome so many of you this evening. What we do ask is that if you would like to make a donation, we are actually a charity for those who are not familiar. And while this talk is free to join, we would greatly appreciate a donation to support the work we do to look after these amazing places. And without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's guest speaker. So Phil Edwards is Bushy Park's manager, and Phil has been with the Royal Parks for 4 years. He started his career as an apprentice gardener at Pukekura Park in New Plymouth, New Zealand, before coming to the Royal Parks in a temporary role. He was then at Windsor Park for 15 years before seeing the light and coming back to the Royal Parks. He has a wealth of knowledge about Bushy Park, and he and his team, alongside many other partners, have been maintaining and improving Bushy Park. So to hear about this work, we're all very lucky to be spending an hour with Phil to learn what's been happening and the future plans for the haven of wildlife, the mini English countryside inside London that is Bushy Park. So Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Loveday. Hello and welcome to Bushy Park. For those who don't know me, I am Phil Edwards, the park manager. Bushy Park is 1,100 acres and the majority of it is open to the visitor. In 2014, most of the park was designated a biological site of special scientific interest, along with Hampton Court Own Park. The park does go back to the Bronze Age and has a rich tapestry of history, which includes Henry VIII taking Hampton Court from Cardinal Wolsey and establishing the surrounding area of the palace into deer hunting grounds. In addition, the Longford River was constructed under the orders of King Charles I to provide Hampton Court with water. More recently, the park hosted the King's Canadian Hospital in the First War and General Eisenhower in the United States military at the Camp Griffiths in the Second World War. Today, the park hosts 6 sports clubs, several lodges, and cottages, allotments, the Pheasantry Cafe, a visitor centre, Field Studies Council, the City of London Police, the Horse Rangers and companion cycling. Park Run, the worldwide movement, started in Bushy Park. Each Saturday we can reach up to 3,000 runners, especially on Christmas and New Year's Day. Whenever I think of Bushy Park, I always think of teamwork. And since my appointment back on the 1st of April 2021, I have been supported and encouraged by my local team, my fellow colleagues within the Royal Parks, the Wildlife Group, and of course, the Friends of Bushy and Home Parks. I am proud of what we have achieved in almost 4 years, and without a whole of the Bushy community, we wouldn't have achieved a fraction of it. When I started back in April 2021, it was a baptism of fire. It was hard enough to learn the geography, policies, procedures, trailing the movement strategy and the workings of the park, but also managing the impact of COVID. My staff had been furloughed and I found myself alone in the White Lodge dealing with government guidance on how to manage COVID in a public space. while dealing with new visitors discovering Bushy Park for the first time to improve their well-being. Each week brought uncertainty and reactive management. But through the support of the community of Bushy Park, I could escape the distraction of COVID and concentrate on how I could help the park. Our very first priority was the need to remove invasive species at Bushy. Was inundated with Rhododendron ponticum, and unfortunately the Friends kindly donated £10,000 to the start of the removal program. This was a huge learning curve for me, as coming from Windsor Great Park, where we had a different management structure, which allowed me just to get on with the job, wasn't the same here at Bushy. As soon as we started the chainsaws, the chairman of the Friends and I were vigorously contacted with concerns and apprehension, and I learned very quickly the need to inform and explain what we're trying to achieve. At the same time, it was becoming apparent to the Royal Park senior management team that because of the nature, structure, and community surrounding the parks, that the outer parks were suffering from the fallout of COVID, such as an increased footfall and the adverse effect it had on its landscapes. Greenwich was receiving separate funding through a HFL grant, so a separate restoration fund was set up for Bushy and Richmond parks to address local issues in Bushy and Richmond. This was a 3-year project, and in the first year was supported by the DCMS, Postcode Lottery Fund and the Royal Parks. The following 2 years were supported by the Royal Parks, Postcode Lottery and the Friends. Moving on to the financial year of 2021-2022, the Bushy and Richmond restoration team was established and led by my colleagues Rona and Georgie from the landscape team, and was supported by many colleagues throughout the organisation. In this initial year, the team concentrated in 4 main areas. The key areas we wanted to address were the infrastructure that suffered the most in the first year of COVID. The first project being a replacement of a 6-foot wooden palisade fence that enclosed the brewhouse field. This is a restricted conservation area of the park, to which the public are only permitted at certain times of the year, but unfortunately was being abused during COVID. So the team replaced the fence with a traditional 700 linear metre of deer fence to continue to securely enclose the whole of the brewhouse field. We planted 1,671 native woods to form a mixed native hedge. The visual impact was almost immediate and allowed the visitors to see the aspects of the brewhouse field. The second investment was the reinstatement of the historic hawthorn hedge from centuries ago, which has disappeared all but from a few veterans. We then planted 800 native hedging plants and several specimen trees, and then protected it with a 174 linear metre fence. This hedge is just north of Ash Walk. Our third project was to install a double row of mixed native hedge species along Horse Paddock Lane, which is 945 linear metres in length and with a total of 5,500 mixed native hedge species. We continued with the project of the rhododendron clearance in the Waterhouse plantation and additionally in Keeper's Wood, and follow up with native planting to provide a windbreak for the pheasantry gardens. The last major project was the commencement of the path reinstatement in the woodland gardens and 192 linear metres at Cannons Gate, followed by reseeding with bespoke seed mix. In the woodlands, we rerouted 500 linear metres, which included an old main path beneath a mature cedar and an oak. This reduced root compaction, and additional to this, we installed 300 square metres of paving to improve the cafe area, to protect the trees, and to allow a larger area for the visitors to eat and drink outside. We included 2 platform areas, including Duck Island and Trish's Pond. We were fortunate enough to receive additional funding from the Postcode Lottery, in which we undertook 3 projects, starting with an ambitious desilting program. This started at a point called Roaring Arch and finished off at Trish's Pond. We utilised the silt to reform the banks, giving us form, structure and a platform for future planting. We also partially lined Hampton Hill Pond so it would retain water in the springtime and provide suitable conditions for newts to successfully breed. We also worked with the apprentice to create a hibernaculum for amphibians to use in the colder months. To complete this project, around the pond, we erected a small 1.2 metre estate railing fence to protect the site. The last project in the postcode lottery was to establish a new mixed native hedge, a clapper gate, to help create a hedgerow as well as a screen. As if this was not enough, the local team were determined to contribute by arranging the return of the Shire horses to the park, where they harrowed the avenues, rolled the bracken, which means the eradication of chemical application in the park. The Shire horses also provided Christmas carriage rides. We identified 15 veteran trees that would benefit from the protection of Sussex cleft fencing and mulched. Assisted the Friends in replanting the pheasantry car park. In the year, the team provided 53 trees, 352 shrubs, 477 bulbs, 663 herbaceous plants, and 8 climbers. After the lessons learned from the previous year, we put communication in the forefront of all our projects through the Royal Parks and the Friends social media platforms, and ensuring there were notice boards explaining what, when, and why we are all undertaking the work. And as a consequence, we received many positive verbal compliments from the daily visitors in the park. Just one more note of interest. This was the year we also introduced dogs on leash during the birthing season. Because of the successful work we undertook in the financial year of 2021-2022, it highlighted to the senior Royal Parks management team that both Bushy and Richmond still were in need of investment. So in the following financial year, 2022-2023, we continue with the same format, funded by the Royal Parks, Postcode Lottery and the Friends. With the restoration team, we continue to restore 1.2 kilometres of path in the Pheasantry Gardens, which fortunately complemented all the pathworks in the Pheasantry. At the same time, we installed a larger viewing platform and a curved style at Trish's Pond that enables the visitors to sit, relax and enjoy the view. The 4 strategic objectives, Royal Parks objectives, are conserve and enhance, welcoming the visitor, building a secure future, and strengthening people and partnership. Against the background of these objectives, we pursued the following projects. The first project was to replace the derelict wooden fencing that encloses the Pheasantry Gardens with 3.9 kilometres of steel fencing. This instantaneously brought a visual connection with the Pheasantry Gardens and the deer park, as well as benefiting the wildlife and the planting with more light and air. In addition to the railings, we installed new accessible pedestrian gates at Crocodile Bridge, Duck Gate, the Pheasantry car park with double gates, and 4 maintenance gates. We continued with the removal of the ponticum, and this year we removed a total of 2,166 metres on Keepers Wood West and the Bog Garden. We supplemented the removal of the ponticum by planting 747 native plants in Keepers Wood. We also reinstated a Cotswold path from Chestnut Avenue to Crocodile Bridge. The lottery grant team, led by Peter and Sam from the Ecology Department, continued with the desilting, this time in the Pheasantry Garden, starting at Keepers Stream and finishing at Trish's Pond. At the same time, we installed 3 silt traps from Fisher's Pond to Trish's Pond. Installed a Koya revetment along Roaring Arch with native marginal plants embedded in the Koya. The team also started to tackle the North Woods by removing unwanted vegetation and the creation of a network of dead hedges that will enable us to wisely manage our risings while creating a new habitat. We did undertake the planting with volunteers and planted 900 whips that would be the future succession canopy trees, pollinators and scrub planting. The Friends of Bushy Park kindly donated £10,000 for planting and infrastructure work at Mary's Glade in honour of Her Majesty's Jubilee. Colin and David from the Friends worked closely with Georgie and Joe Scrivener, the Assistant Park Manager at Richmond Park, to come up with a design and together we planted the scheme in 2 days with the woodlands teams and the friends themselves. They planted 15 trees, 70 shrubs, and 555 bulbs. Outside of this work, we have been defining the character of the gardens, and collectively decisions were reached to go forward. For example, the old conifers and Fisher's lawn that were part of the old heather beds back in the 70s were in poor condition. This had provided an opportunity to look at Fisher's lawn as an informal arboretum, supplemented by wildflower meadows. After planning consent was obtained, we removed the conifers and replaced them with native specimen trees and made appropriate changes to our mowing regimes to accommodate the wildflower. In 2024, we intend to place out picnic tables so the visitor can relax and savour the environment. We identified that 29 Japanese cherries planted alongside the North Woods, which is predominantly native, was a little out of place. So we invested in a tree spade to transplant them to various positions throughout the woodlands. This year was a significant year for our catering contractor, Kalichi, who was awarded the new catering contract for Bushy Park. They invested heavily in the Pheasantry Cafe that is a credit to the park and to its visitors. Alongside of this, they've replaced the kiosk at Dinah Car Park with a new kiosk that's more than a kiosk, it's a work of art. Something small, but less important, just as important, we installed an electric feeder pillar at the playground, so the ice cream van can provide ice cream and drinks to those who utilise the playground, rather than put up with the historic practice of running diesel generators to meet demands. This brings us to the financial year 2023-2024, and understandably, this is the last year of the Bushy Enrichment Restoration Funded project. We focused on the restoration of the Waterhouse plantation. We follow suit by replacing the wooden fencing and replacing it with the steel fencing to ensure the Waterhouse is protected by deer. The 1.425 kilometres of state railing includes 9 accessible visitor gates and 7 maintenance gates. We are configuring and strengthening 4.981 kilometres of paths in the Waterhouse and Ash Walk. We have continued with the removal of 11,000 square metres of ponticum and keeper's wood and broom clumps. This has been supplemented by planting of 44 trees, 1,816 whips of native hedging, 280 native ferns, 550 perennial plants, and 4,400 square metres of native wildflower seed. Turning to people who work here. This year, Vincent Quartermain joined us as the head gardener of the Woodland Gardens. Vincent has made a marvellous impact by motivating the gardening and volunteer teams by giving them direction. This year alone, they have planted 96 trees, 11,500 bulbs, 590 shrubs, 800 native hedging whips, and 950 plugs for wildflower meadow and the pheasantry. With Vincent taking ownership of the Woodland Gardens, this has allowed us to focus on the deer park. One project I'm particularly proud of is the commitment of managing the bracken. We have around 45 hectares of bracken, and although the bracken has its benefits, because of mapping and surveys, we've discovered that we are losing around 4 hectares of valuable SSSI acid grassland to bracken every 10 years. So with the help of the wildlife group, Sam, the Shire Horse team, and John, the wildlife officer, we identified suitable rolling areas. A total of 4 hectares was rolled in the first year and 5 in the second year. This helps to prevent bracken invading more conservation grassland and enables us to begin the process of restoring good quality acid grassland. It also helps to maintain a balance of refuge and open spaces for the deer herd, and improves public safety where dense continuous streams of bracken occur alongside the pathways. After the first 2 rolls, we adopted an enclosure design developed by Bill, our assistant park manager. We've installed the first of 3 in November, and the remaining 2 will be installed by the 31st of March. We are planting a variety of species to address our lack of succession trees, provide new habitats and food sources, while providing new flora and fauna interest to the visitors. Since the path renovations in the pheasantry, Jill, our technical officer, has had the opportunity to install 8 new benches in the Pheasantry Gardens to help provide a comfortable resting spot for the visitor, and 24 benches in the deer park. The art team has also made an inspiring contribution by collecting 4 kilograms of hawthorn seed and have engaged a nursery to germinate them and grow them on so we can plant them out in the upcoming years. Now, I know in my heart I've overlooked a contribution and projects and individuals that have supported us in a massive transition over the past 4 years. That I apologise, and it's not intentional, but simply been overwhelmed at how much the community has achieved. With this in mind, I've decided to make the financial year 2024-2025 a year of consolidation to enable us to take stock and ensure that we've embedded the previous 4 years' work, ensure we have drawn up and can resource maintenance schedules, and in some cases, complete and enhance what we have started, such as Bream's Clumps, Northwoods, Trish's and Fisher's Pond, and of course, Keeper's Wood. We still have a duty to remove the invasive species, and this year we will branch out to the aquatics and managing neighbouring Royal Parks land under licence. To continue with the planting, not just in the woodlands, but also in the deer park. For example, we have budgeted and planned to install 10 new wildlife scrub enclosures in the deer park after the next bracken roll. These will be scattered throughout the park, but consistently of native material. We will also investigate a new bloodline for the deer. We will continue to undertake surveys. These include reptiles and small mammals, and I'm very keen to review all the surveys and studies undertaken over the past 5 years and practically schedule in the appropriate recommendations into our daily work and seek support if a project is needed. 2024-2025 financial year will be a big year for the park and the community as we're about to embark on the management plan. Personally, this is a critical year. Based on what has been achieved, we need to maintain and sustain the park on the backdrop of available resources and the ever unpredictable climate change. The management plan will be a complex document outlining the history, landscape features, specification, policies, management issues, building, hard landscaping, and much more. It needs to incorporate a sensible, practical timeline that will help the team to address concerns, any potential risks, and build a process that will allow the park to cope with the increased visitors, the unpredictable climate, and installs resilience. Within this, we'll be undertaking feasibility studies to deal with issues such as desilting, the brew house, nature trail, and Duke's Head Passage, just to name a few. To a degree, infrastructure such as paths, fencing, catering, toilets address the primary concerns of the visitor, but the identity of the park will be determined on how we manage the fabric and ecosystems. All the surveys that we have undertaken over the past decade will filter into the management plan. Examples of such of the surveys and studies undertaken specifically for Bushy Park are invasive species, aquatic flora and fauna, voles, skylarks, newts, mitten crabs, yellow ant, solitary bees, frog spawn watch, water body survey, fungi, earthworms, bats, stag beetles, hedgehogs, bioacoustics, biophyte survey, flea treatment, grassland surveys, alternative grazing, soil surveys, woodland surveys, deer surveys, hydrology, and hawthorns. And that's just the reports on my coffee table in the office. We are fortunate enough to have a proactive wildlife group who contribute together with the biodiversity team. They help me understand the base level of what the state of our wildlife and the knowledge on how we need to protect and enhance them and their habitats. We are fortunate enough to have an amazing landscape within wildlife, and I must reassure you that everything that we do has the wildlife in mind, as well as conserving and enhancing the landscape. I could rattle off a list a mile long what I've seen while I've been in Bushy, but the following are just some of my favourites. And the discovery is the exciting part, so I'll only highlight a few and let you discover your favourites, but mine are the skylarks, sparrowhawks, kestrels, kingfisher, heron, hedgehogs, grass snakes, newts, dung beetles, the ants and the anthills, stag beetle, and obviously our deer. Before I finish, I'd like to thank you for listening and thank my colleagues for asking me to do this podcast, because it's made me stop and review my time at Bushy Park, remind me of what we all have achieved in a relatively short period of time. I will say that this journey has been eventful and had a huge learning curve to me and to the team. But I would also like to reinforce that the fact that we are determined to build on the good work. And if you feel you want to play more of a part in the community of Bushy Park, can I recommend a couple of avenues? The Friends of Bushy and Home Park, volunteering for the gardening or the conservation team, join the volunteer rangers, join the Safer Parks panel, simply follow us on social media, or just visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. So I'll pop through a couple of questions, Phil, to start off with, because we had a few that had already come through. And the first one we have was, how do you maintain the walking path through the grasslands?
That's kind of like a double-edged sword. One of the golden rules for the Royal Parks is that we cannot lose any green space. We've made a promise to the visitors and to the people of London and the DCMS that we will keep the green space. So to a lot of it, we try and rely on the desire lines and try and keep them narrow. And to a degree with Bushy Park, the anthills help. Where we have had trouble, like Ash Walk, where we've had major desire lines, and up by Cannons Gate, we've purposely put in or redefined the tracks, so then it's highlighted to people, and we're trying to ask people to be considerate.
Fantastic. Another question we have that's come through is, has the conservation area set aside for skylarks been successful in maintaining and protecting the species?
It has, but it must be known that the skylarks are vulnerable. What we're doing is we've got a fantastic guy in the wildlife group, John, who's helping us monitor, and we constantly review our processes. What we are doing is we've gone through social media. We've asked people to keep dogs on these, mainly because we need to keep the disruption to a very minimum. We will review our process. You'll see that Richmond Park has asked people to keep dogs on their skylark areas 12 months a year. I appreciate I haven't done that this year, simply because we're a fifth of the size of Richmond and the location of the skylark area is right by the Church Grove Passage. So what I want to do is see how successful Richmond is. What I might do as an interim next year is potentially expose the area a little bit wider, still let people go through it and take the dogs off in different times, but that way it just gives the skylarks a bit more area. But we're looking into natural predators. We're looking at our maintenance programs. The bracken comes into that. So we're constantly reviewing it.
Excellent. I've got another question that's just come through, so we'll scroll back up to find it. And that was, with climate change and with all the park planting that you mentioned, is that affecting the water needs of the park over time?
It is, but we're making constant changes. So, for instance, we still are, but this will be the last time that you see us using large specimen trees. So you'll find slowly that we will going down to whips. This is a trick that I learned in Windsor from my forestry mate, and please don't tell him because he'll take the credit. But you'll find that forestry, when they plant, they don't irrigate. They put in whips, and if you have a look at what we've done in Brewhouse, we'll overplant, and when you think the whips are quite cheap, and we'll have a 10 to 15% failure rate, but it reduces the water use, but it gets established and grows just as much. In 10 years' time, the whips will be more or less the same as the standards. Where we have planted, what we try and do is start planting in September, so we've got the whole months of water to get their feet down. And as you know, bushy can be very, very wet. So it's where we have planted in keeper's wood, we plant the right appropriate plants, and that's the key. And then the last thing, what we are doing is with our grassland meadow management, is we're letting the grass grow longer which is a natural kind of mulch. So we're using mulch, we're using grass, and we're trying to do different lots of techniques, but we're trying to refrain and be respectful of the water.
And that's going to be an ongoing thing, I imagine, as the climate continues to change as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Another question we've had come through was someone saying, just hi, I live locally and I wonder when and if it's possible to get access to enter the brewhouse fields, as they'd love to have a look.
Yeah, it's something that I'd like to do. I'd like to look at giving people more access. And what we have to do, and this is one of the reasons why I want to do a feasibility study, is how we can do it. Historically, there was a fantastic guy who worked for the Royal Parks called Mike Fitz, and he always kind of reminds me that it was a water meadow. So what I want to try and do is, we've still got some maintenance issues that we need to tidy up, but I want to look at key points of time in the calendar that we have open up, and then potentially ask our volunteers, our guide, our biodiversity team to start coming and using it as an education tool. But the problem that I have got is trying to time frame and phrase all this in. So we're looking at doing that. I can't specifically tell you when it is, but maybe it's something that we can work with the friends as a trial in the next year or this year, and start working along those things. So if you leave that with me, it's something that I can talk to the Colin and the board and see what we can do.
Fantastic. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to hear that. Another question we've had, which might be a bit of a challenging one to answer, was where were you most likely to find the herd? Assuming they're referring to deer when they're asking that.
Okay, I thought you meant my team, and it wasn't the pub on Friday. Okay, the deer are quite creatures of habit. So the three main places are Hampton Hill, Camp Griffiths, and Hampton Hill Gate. Now with the deer, you'll find the fallow will roam at night, and also the red deer females will quite often be nomadic. But those are the three key areas that if you want to walk around.
Fantastic. And another question that came through relating to the deer, which was what happens to the antlers that are shed?
Okay, so when they're shed, usually the gamekeeper, every day he'll spend about an hour or two watching the deer, so he's usually on it. So what he does is he picks them up and brings them back to the office, and then we donate them to schools as part of education, so then they have an understanding for them.
Fantastic. It's something we've got, I believe, one at the Hyde Park Learning Centre as well that we use with our Discovery Days. It's a really useful tool for students to be able to see, and for children to be able to see what they look like and learn about the process. And
yesterday we had a new group, again from the Education Centre, started Green Futures. So we keep them. So we had schools from outer areas come in, and they worked in the Northwoods. So we use them as an education tool. We give some to FSC. So they're used to help for people to understand the deer.
Fantastic. Another question, and again, moving of animals and where to find them seems to be a popular question. So this one comes through asking, are kingfishers resident? And we've seen some photographs, so we know that they are. But where is the best place to see them?
Okay, so kingfishers are residents. The best way to see them is in the water bodies. They love our water networks. So if you go along the streams and be very, very patient, you'll bound to see one at some stage.
Fantastic. And in addition to that, someone's just put in, is there a particular time of day that's best to see the kingfishers?
I usually go for my walk in the mornings and in the evenings, and then that's when I usually kind of when I see them as kind of dusk and dawn.
Sounds great. Brilliant. Someone has also just asked about, they're just interested in some of the fallen trees that are located outside the children's play area, which I think somewhere close to the park run as well.
Yes, it's just outside. So again, we've got to do a playground strategy, and the part, part of the fallen tree came from Broom's Clump, and it was going to be used in the playground. But then unfortunately, due to the weather and because of the SSI ground that we didn't be able to move it in with heavy machinery, it stayed there. And now that it's there, we can't move it because it's within, once you've got fallen wood started, it's part of the ecosystem and it starts a habitat.
It provides a really valuable home for lots of invertebrates as well, which is really important for the food chain, which is wonderful to have. Another question that had just come through before was about if there were any reptiles that could be found in the park.
Reptiles, the main ones we have is the grass snake and the common lizard. Excuse me, but this is one of the surveys. We're doing 2 main surveys this year, and reptiles will be one of them. We've got a fantastic new biodiversity manager, Sarah Hides, and that's her forte, and that's her pet subject. So she's really put that on top of the list, and I couldn't say no because she's also sponsoring other work. So hopefully this time next year we'll be able to give you a bit more of an update.
Fantastic. One of the other questions that's come through is someone who's said when they're walking in the park, they see a fair few properties within the park, and they're wondering how many people roughly are able to live in Bushy on a permanent basis.
That's a very good one. That's one area that I don't know specifically. The lodges are broken down. There's some Crown Estate houses, there's some houses that we're responsible for, and there's some on long-term leases license, and there's also some that's, just counting in my head, 3 members of Royal Park staff who are key workers that live on the site.
Fantastic. This is a question I can probably answer. Someone's just asked if we could say a bit more about how the park was used during the World Wars. And there was actually one of our winter warmer talks that was done a few years ago. So if you go onto the YouTube page, you should be able to find a walking tour that's talking about the parks in World Wars. It might be able to help you out a bit there as well. Now I'm trying to keep up with the questions that have come in and some of the questions that were asked in advance as well. So one question we had was asking, does the Longford River still go through to Hampton Court Palace?
Yes, and we are still responsible for the Longford. And fortunately, we've just got a new Longford manager, Mike Turner, who we pinched from St. James. And yes, it does. Long and short, yes. Now you can understand why I had a script, because I do waffle. So sorry.
That's brilliant. No problem. One other person's put in, I'd like to know more about the anthills. And I realised when you just earlier you also referred to SSSI, that site of special scientific interest, which people may not be aware of. So if you're able to just tell us a little bit about that, that would be great. Okay,
so the anthills, one colony has about 8,000 to 14,000 yellow ants in them. And each, you'll see the mounds in the grass. The idea is the ants will build the mounds up to get the heat of the sun. So they love clear, undisturbed, full sun. And on top of the anthills, they will be the larvae. So they need that warmth for the young and for the larva. Some of the anthills in the park are about 100 to 200 years old. They are a really good stable diet for the green woodpecker. The ants, which is really incredible, only work at night, not during the day. And that's basically it. Hang on, let me just think. Yeah, no, that's basically it. We have a fantastic ecologist, Sam Wilkinson. She is passionate about this. So if anyone does need a little bit more information, please feel free to drop me an email and I will get a bit more if this doesn't answer your question.
Brilliant. One of the other bits we've got just come in, someone's just asked about rabbit in the woodland gardens, and they haven't seen any recently. So just wonder if there's any changes there.
No, I think I started, spring is just around the corner, so is Easter. So I would imagine that they'll be coming out pretty soon.
Brilliant. Just a bit early in the season, perhaps.
I think they nibbled half our crocus bulbs, so they are around.
I think it's often dawn and dusk that is the time that you see rabbits out. So it might be that if you go into the area at that time, that might help you to spot some. Fantastic. I think at this stage, I'm just going through to see if there's any additional questions. Some have come through in the chat as well. So if anyone's able to, if you've got any additional questions you'd like to ask, feel free to please put them in the Q&A and I'll see if I can find them, because it's quite a bit of conversation happening in the chat as well.
While you're looking, the oldest trees, I can answer that one. We actually have the oldest tree in all the royal parks, and that's on the NPL sports ground. And that was planted around 1365 from Edward III, so it's almost 700 years old. The oaks up at Hampton Hill by the perimeter track around about 300 to 400. The veteran hawthorns, which you mainly find around Hawthorn Lodge, the Queen's River to Lime Avenue, they're about 90 to 120 years old. And then some of the limes in Lime Avenue on Chestnut Avenue are around about 300 years old.
Makes sense. Oh, that's some incredibly old trees. I don't think I'd realised. I have to revisit and see if I can find those. Brilliant. Another question that's come through, which is a question we get asked quite often in quite a few of the parks, is about whether it's safe to feed the ducks and birds with bread in the water near the river.
We prefer you not to. There's a couple of reasons, because it's not good for the birds, and B, the birds do survive on their own. And this is the problem that we have got, is that if you make them less reliant on their natural instincts, it doesn't make them aware on a bleak winter. So preferably we would just prefer not to, and let them just naturally survive the way they do.
Fantastic. Someone has also just put into the chat that they did actually see 3 rabbits in the woodland gardens yesterday. So they are there. I think it might just be a time of day that we are able to see them. There's another one that's just come through. So I may not be able to get to all of our questions today. I realise there's quite a few that came in advance. There's also quite a few that are coming through both in the chat and in the Q&A. So if I miss your question, I do apologise. Do feel free to email us as well, and we might be able to respond back afterwards. If I just look through, there's one that just came through asking, have there been any fines in the park from Henry VIII's reign?
Not in my time that I know of. I'm sure there is. Again, there's a fantastic guy on this line, a man called David Iverson, who knows more about history than I know about life. So he's from the Friends. So I'm sure if you send the question to the Friends, he'll be able to help you with that one, I'm afraid.
Fantastic. Another question that's just come through is Bushy home to any endangered species of either animals or plants?
I knew I was going to get this one. There is actually a beetle that's named after Bushy, and I'm afraid I can't remember it. I've been up since 5 and I'm just totally kind of brain dead now. So again, if you please email me. It's peterwas@theroyalparks.org.uk. I will drop you a line next week and I'll let you know what it is.
Brilliant. I'm just going to add in, I know that some of our colleagues from Help Nature Thrive recently did a dung beetle survey, and they found a couple of species of dung beetle that were scarce and not known to be in Bushy Park. So there's still a lot of ongoing research. I think Phil, you also mentioned that there's a lot of plans to hopefully implement some of that research as well. So it's what we're hoping to continue to learn about the biodiversity that is there, which is fantastic. Now, if we just have any last questions, if they would like to come through now, that'd be good. We've answered that. Checking the Q&A, there was another a couple more that have just come through there. One was, are there any terrapins in the water, and do they cause any problems?
I think there are. I think they're down in the boating pond. Again, it's not ideal to have them. We do have our problems with our waterways. We have invasive species, pennywort. I hate to say, Loveday, there's a couple of noxious aquatic weeds from New Zealand, including the flatworm, so we get blamed for that. But yeah, the terrapins are down in the boating pond. Again, it's not ideal. What we do find is exactly the same with the mitten crab, is that when you do get a new species in, and with the terrapins, it's probably an unwanted pet, that it unbalances the natural ecosystem.
Excellent. Someone's just put in the chat, and I'm not sure how my Latin is going to be for pronouncing this, but they were saying, is it the rusty click beetle, a later ferruginous, that's the endangered one found in Bushy?
It could well be.
Might be one we need to just look up to check. There was another question that's come through, which might be one of our last questions for this evening, which was, are there any champion trees in the park?
I can't remember, to be honest with you. I'm really, really sorry. I can't. I think there is. I'm really sorry. I'd have to double check. I wouldn't say yes and I don't like, yeah.
Don't want to mislead.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yes.
No, there's so many, such a vast area. I mean, I think you mentioned the size of it was, can you just repeat what the size
1,100
of
acres. Yeah.
It's a vast area, so a lot of things to know about.
Yeah, and I can't reinforce how we've done so much, and my speciality of park management is generalistic and facilitating, and you'll get different skills in each park manager. It's like if you go to Mark and St. James's plants and ceremonies, I tend to facilitate and plan and do that sort of stuff, and the maintenance and make changes. So that's why I'm so dependent on the teams of and that's the real nice thing about working for the Royal Parks, is we're so supported by so many divisions and so much specialities that I've become almost a bit lazy, and I just have to worry about the day to day and not expand myself with the knowledge.
Well, conveniently for us, someone's just popped in the chat that they believe the Montpellier maple is a champion. So I wonder if that's the Montpellier maple potentially that's a champion tree.
Could well be, yep.
That could well be in there. And then I think this might be our last question for this evening, and that was, when is the best season to watch wildlife in the park? This person was saying they're not from London. Is it late autumn or October? Is that still a good time, or is there a particular season that you would recommend?
I think there's almost any time, but you're right, autumn and spring, but I find it's when the quietest. I can remember when I worked in Hyde Park, I used to start work at 4 or 5, and you'll be really, really surprised at what you see in Hyde. So here, when you do go around, it's spring, early morning, late night, or then and occasionally, because we're so fortunate and we've got 1,100 acres and it's relatively not a busy park compared to others, the nature does feel a little bit more relaxed. So if you just kind of find a quiet spot, be patient, lie down, you're bound to see something. I mean, from when I go from my office down to the Woodland Gardens, I quite often see the egret at Roaring Arch. You just have to be patient and just open-eyed.
Definitely, there's a lot to be seen, but it is also a really large area. So I think the idea of sitting down and just spending some time there is a really great suggestion. Now, unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of our evening this evening, so we will need to wrap up questions there. I just really wanted to say thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Phil, and for sharing all of your knowledge with everyone. And thank you to everyone who has joined us tonight. If you've enjoyed it and would like to make a donation to support our work, then I'll pop the link in the chat. There's also a link in there to upcoming events that we have in the Royal Parks. If I just pop that in, and also to the Royal Parks newsletter. Now, the newsletter is something you can sign up for if you'd like to, and that gives you information about upcoming events and things that are going in across all of the parks. So thank you so much for coming along, as I said, this evening, and we really hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.